Okay, good afternoon. So it's our fourth lecture, fourth encounter. You remember that we have explored many types of spaces, and each time thinking to have a kind of pure case, and it was always impure, always in something more inner, get in the exterior place, or vice versa. So today I said I will really go inside and enough of this ambiguity, but you would see it will not work either. And I thought of the inner space, so what's happening in the head, what's happening in the mental space. And then right away I said, I remember what our whole philosophy teacher was using to tell us. I don't know if you had the same advantage as me, but some of these courses were given in Latin even. So they were telling us, shouting like this, nihil in intellectus prius in sensu. Nothing get in the intellect before it went first through the senses. And indeed, when you think of it, the inner space is full of images, full of souvenirs, full of things that come from outside. So the problem is the following: how to represent that? Because, of course, I'm interested in painting, how the painters will, and especially Canadian painter, will translate this idea that we have a kind of inner world like this. One of the strategy that was followed, and you see they have certain efficacity, efficient, it is to represent somebody with closed-eyed. Why? Because then is like cut from the outside, and he suggests that something happening inside that you cannot, of course, see because you have closed eyes. And you know this saying, eyes are the mirror of the soul. Well, then, yeah, the mirror is closed. You don't see, but you could suggest that way a certain inner space. Mind you, this is a little bit ambivalent and difficult to handle, because even when you are dead, you have also closed-eyed, and a corpse doesn't have any mind, any interiority to that, at least we suppose. That's why we want to have a soul to be outside of this thing. And this is a famous photo of Victor Hugo, you know, the great French poet of the 19th century, on his deathbed, done by Nadar. And Nadar is one of the first great photographers. So the problem then is if you represent somebody with closed eye, you have to be careful also to suggest that he's alive, that he's not dead, that there is something behind his closed eyes. And maybe the most famous and symbolic example of that in, I would say, international art is this Odilon Redon, Les yeux clos, in French, the closed eyes. It seems that it's a portrait of his wife, Camille Fault, and in which you have possibly many reading possible. She could be indeed thinking, she could be dreaming, but also she could evoke a certain aspect of death. And this is a theme that Redon was very much enthralled with, as you see in his personal diary. He comes often on this idea that this internal world that we could express that way by closed-eyed was the place of the dream, of course, the place of thought, but also eventually the place of death. And this possibility of apparition and disparition, of presence and non-presence and absence is always a theme in which he was fascinated by. It seems that he took his inspiration from, for instance, this Francesco Lorana bust of Baptista Sforza. Keep in mind this name, we will see it a little bit later in the lecture. So she's not really with completely closed-eyed, she's like half closed, but she's very much inside of herself. She doesn't communicate with the exterior world. And you see which type of work they are groping at. That idea that you represent somebody with half-closed eyes or with closed eye that suggests behind some thought, some interiority. We know that Redon was fascinated by the famous Michelangelo dying slave that he could see in the Louvre, so it was easy for him to see, and especially by the closed eye. What I present to you on the right is a kind of moulage of the head of the dying slave, and you see with the closed eye also, he called le charme des yeux clos, the kind of fascination of this face that is mourant, meaning is dying, is not really dead, but what's happened behind these closed eyes. And all this, of course, he tried to put in his Odilon, in his picture that I was showing you before. So what it is now with Canadian painter with this theme. And of course, the first one we think of the type of approach must be Ozias-Leduc. And indeed, you will see it's a theme that he have treated many times and in different way, and especially maybe in the most famous painting of this kind is this one, Endymion and Selene. It's based on rather obscure part of the mythology. So it's not a very common tale, let's say, that we find in the mythology of the Greek or Roman mythology. But it is this idea that this young man, Endymion, was a shepherd, and he saw himself as so beautiful that he wanted to keep his eternal youth, you know. And so he asked that from the gods, and Zeus gave him this permission, but with one condition, that he will sleep eternally. So he's always asleep, but he kept his eternal youth that way. It's a little bit like, you remember the myth of Narcissus. You exchange beauty with death. Now it's not death, but eternal sleep is not far from death. It's a little bit the same thing. And so, beautiful as he was, some goddess fell in love with him. And Selene is the moon goddess. And so she used to come every night to visit him in the grotto where he was sleeping, and giving him just a very little kiss, not to wake him up, for God's sake, because then he will age terribly, but to show a little bit of her love. And then she went, and every night like this she was coming back to see. I don't know why Leduc was fascinated by this subject in particular, but we know that he made careful sketches to prepare this thing. For instance, this little drawing, now it's blown up at a proportion that was almost ridiculous, because it's amount big like this. And this little drawing, in fact, is a drawing of his future wife, of Marie-Thérèse Lebrun. And she's sleeping, and so she didn't bother what he was doing. So he made this little drawing, and there is some resemblance with the Endymion of the painting, as if he took inspiration from this drawing to make the Endymion. Doing that, he gave to the picture a kind of, I would say, autobiographical dimension, because if this woman sleeping is like Endymion, you could say that Leduc wished that she kept her eternal youth. And since he will marry her soon, this is a good idea. So he had also other drawings, preparatory of the same thing. For instance, the goddess, the Selene, is inspired by the drawing on the left that he did when he was in Paris. And Leduc was a rather modest and shy man, but in Paris he hired a young model that posed for him, even in the nude, and so he kept these drawings preciously all his life and used them all the time, because in Saint-Hilaire there was not too many models where he lived, and since he was a church painter, if he was known to have nude people in his studio, he may have lost some contracts. Anyway, but he used this girl very nice. She's a little charming person that he met in Paris, but that he had as a model. And on the right, of course, it's a drawing preparatory of the painting, very close to the mise en scène and how the two personages will function one with the other. And so this theme of sleeping and even eternal sleep being seen as life open, of course, on the world of the dream. And this is certainly one of the aspects that was fascinating for Leduc. then I said, there's others artists who have dealt with this also in a very different way. And I thought of some photographer. After all, photography is also a part of art. And I thought of Raymond April, which is a very famous photographer and happens to be a colleague at Concordia University, so I'm happy to lift my hat to her. And she had also, in her photography, used this idea of the closed eye to suggest some interior life. So here, it's an auto-portrait, it's a self-portrait, it's her, sitting near a window where the wind comes from outside, and you see above her the curtain who floats in midair, and so probably she installed her camera somewhere, and with a remote control, she could photograph herself like this. But she photographed herself with closed eyes. What you see on the left, it's probably, because we are in the studio, it's some photos that she have mounted like this. And well. But then I said, okay, this is interesting because you have the two aspects. You have something coming from outside, but also being felt, being enjoyed. In a way, it's like very pleasant. Just think of a very hot summer, for instance, day, in which suddenly you have this little breeze as it comes from outside and refresh you, and you just enjoy the sensation on your skin of this wind. And she was, of course, interviewed on this, and what she explained, I think it's interesting because she underlined this aspect. She says, what I was taken by was the wind. It was very soft and coming in from the windows, so the curtains were floating. That's what I wanted to capture. I think it's about the sensation of wind, of being almost outside and of the outside coming in. That's a very good definition of the sensation, and it reminds almost what Descartes used to say about it, as if we have a kind of passive faculty to receive things, but because of that, we must have somewhere an active things that bring the things to us and make us suddenly conscious of it. Bear with me, I will just quote Descartes a little bit, Les Méditations, in which he says, now there is in me a passive faculty of sensory perception that is a faculty for receiving and recognizing the ideas of sensible objects. But I could not make use of it unless there was also an active faculty, either in me or in something else, which produced or brought about these ideas. He is in the middle of this kind of problem only philosophers will lose their time on. Is the exterior world exists really? Like I used to say, just try to go through this wall, you will see how the exterior world exists. But it is this type of thing. So what he means by something active coming from outside, it is the exterior world that will suddenly, but we need also a passive faculty to be able to receive that and to live it. And I think the photo of Raymond April expressed that. When she says something from outside coming in, it's exactly a good definition of this sensation. And I think it's more efficient the way she represented by closing her eyes and seeing with a half smile, you see, just enjoying the things and make you feel that when you look at the photo. A way also to check that, that's another photo of her, who is more bizarre because now we don't see any face. As if now she suppressed one of the aspects. You have only let's say, the strong wind who transform her, push her hair and erase her face completely. So we cannot know, is she enjoying? Is she laughing because of these beads that she have, that you cannot put her hair back as it should for a photo? Normally, you want to be presentable. And so we don't know what she feels because we don't see the face at all. As if we had now just half of this phenomenon that I was describing. Again, when she was asked about what is so fascinating in that photo, she explained it, but you would see in two different ways. She says, when I took this image, there was a very strong wind, and that was what was really fascinating, okay? She's also wearing a flower dress, and she's among weeds. Okay, she described the model there, the person who's there. It looks like a big tapestry. I've always been very sensitive to that issue of background, foreground, and the flattening of all the grounds. I have liked display with perspective. Maybe it's that, or maybe it's because our face is hidden. And I think the real reason is that their face is hidden. That's why it's so fascinating, because then you have to project in the image as many content as you want. Otherwise, you will be oriented already in one direction. Another photo of Raymond April that will add a twist to the situation. It's again a self-portrait, but with black eyes. I don't know what happened to her, but she's in bad situation. She have what you see under her eyes are not painting or something like that. It's really, she had maybe just an implant, you know, a dental implant. I don't know. And I think it's not our business also to know. And then it's an autoportrait, it's a self-portrait done by the photographer with close-eyed, and like cutting herself, of course, from any look toward us, and representing like this a kind of the mystery of the thought itself. You see this big forehead, and you can imagine maybe she's thinking of her pain, maybe she's thinking of completely something else, but we are no way to get inside of this. And this idea of showing, especially in photography, people with closed eyes is not completely original. What is original here? It is that it's a self-portrait. Because, of course, you can see photos of people with closed eyes who are model, who are persons that are related more or less with the photographer. Like, for instance, on the left, Blumenfeld was a photographer working for Vogue and Harper, and this is one of the fashion models that probably fell asleep during and he photographed her with closed eye and then put the photo upside down and make it more interesting that way. The other one is a little bit more complicated. Man Ray, you know, he's an important artist related to the Dada movement and to the Surrealist, and he was very active also in photography himself, in film. And this is an extract of a little film he did. It was called L'Étoile de Mer, no? the starfish. And the starfish en question is this lady, in fact, is the girlfriend in Paris. And at the moment where they break, and he photographed her like this in this film. It's a film without words. It's a kind of, comment est-ce qu'on dit, film muet. What? And and like in this film, you have a little caption from time to time, and okay. And at a certain point, when she quit her lover, that's what you see on the right, she gave him a starfish in a bowl. And that's why it's called L'Étoile de Mer, the starfish. The last scene is a little bit troubling because you see her climbing a stair with a knife in his hand. If he wants to suggest that they separate at this time, well, maybe the separation was a little bit violent, I don't know. This idea of relationship, woman and man in surrealist type of surrounding. You remember Le Chien Andalou. I don't know if you have seen this. It's a little film done by Dali and Buñuel, in which there's an horrible scene of a woman having her eye cut by a razor. Have you seen that? No? Okay. This is not for children. This is not for really adult people. Okay. And you see the left scene is just before that she does that. And then on the right scene, I will heal your pain right away. He used a dead cow to do that, okay? The right scene was done not on Madame Koireki, who is here, but on a dead cow and since it's done in very close up, we cannot see it, and the montage, of course, is perfect. You go from one image to the other. You do find a kind of aggression like this among the surrealists, aggression against the eye. In Georges Bataille, l'histoire d'œil. Many surrealists have been fascinated by this idea of attacking the eye. Why? Because the eye is the contact with the exterior. And when you have no eye, you are inside. You are in the world of dream. And dream is the marvelous. So for the surrealists, very often it's a way to express this prevalence, let's say, or the preeminence of dream on reality. And it's a theme that come often among them. In the tradition, you do have dreamers, but not, of course, with suggestion of aggression like this, or sadistic imply like this. I thought of the great dreamer of the gospel is Saint Joseph. Each time he's mentioned, he's dreaming. And then here is the famous painting by Philippe de Champagne, Saint Joseph Dream. So you have Saint Joseph sleeping in the foreground and an angel appearing to him and the Virgin in the back. I just read you the passage of the gospel. I think it's sweet and express exactly what we see there. Mary was engaged to Joseph, but before they were married, she found out that she was going to have a baby by the Holy Spirit. Joseph was a man who always did what is right, but he did not want to disgrace Mary publicly, so he made plans to break the engagement privately. While he was thinking about this, an angel of the Lord appeared to him in a dream and said, Joseph, descendant of David, do not be afraid to take Mary to be your wife, for it is by the Holy Spirit that she have conceived. She will have a son, and you will name him Jesus, because he will save his people from sin. Now, all this happened in order to make come true what the Lord had said through the prophet, a virgin will become pregnant and have a son, and he will be called Emmanuel, which means God is with us. So when Joseph woke up, he married Mary, and the angel of the Lord, and as the angel of the Lord has told him to. But he had no sexual relation with her before she gave birth to her son, and Joseph named him Jesus. He's a very tolerant man. Anyway, wonderful, sweet guy. He just needed a dream with an angel to ease his wordiness, let's say. And one of the most fantastic representation of this idea of the dream of Joseph is probably this one, because it's so simple and so direct. It's by Georges de la Tour. And you have Joseph sleeping on the right, and then the angel is represented just by a small, relatively young boy with a famous candle to get the... And it's exactly the same idea. The angel come to tell him not to worry and to marry Jesus. Okay, so you see that this idea of close eye have a long tradition in a way, and this idea of evoking the dream, I think we could find like this endlessly kind of labyrinth of connection and all that. But I come back to the April self-portrait, and what is strange here, it is that it's a self-portrait. Because habitually, the situation of a self-portrait is that you cannot close your eyes. If the painter wants to make his own portrait, you have to look at the mirror and then look at the canvas and paint himself like this, like in this classical way to present the thing. You see, by this Johannes Gump painter, on which we know almost nothing, just this painting, and that is called that way. And he represents exactly, it's him, we see from the back, and on the left, it is his reflection in a mirror, and on the right, it is what he's painting. The problem is, of course, is how he sees himself from the back, but this is another problem. In another version of the same painting, he put a cat and a dog on the foreground also to show that I can do something else. I don't need just a mirror. I have also imagination. But nevertheless, this is the classical situation of a self-portrait. A self-portrait, by definition, suppose that you are in painting, that you have open eyes. And if you make a self-portrait of you closing eyes, you may use a photograph to do it, but you cannot do it directly like this. Or you will have to close your eyes and open them, close your eyes and open them endlessly. You see, so that's why there is a kind of originality, I think, in the approach of Raymond April. Especially when, let's make a little digression also about photography itself. You know, one of the great theorists, let's say, of the photography situation is Roland Barthes. Roland Barthes was a great writer and also a critic, and have made a lot of contribution in many fields, but he wrote a book which is called La Chambre Claire in French, and it was translated the Camera Lucida in English, and in which he described, I think, in a very interesting way, what it is to be photographed. what is the experience of to be suddenly photographed? And that's what he says. He says, in terms of image repertoire, the photograph, the one I intend, represent that very subtle moment when, to tell the truth, I am neither a subject nor an object, but a subject who feels he is becoming an object. I then experience a micro version of death, of being put in parentheses, if you want. I'm truly becoming a specter. Okay, so you understand what he says, is that I'm a subject, so I'm somebody with an interiority and all that, but when I get photographed, I get the feeling that I am transformed into an object. Even, for instance, the photographer will tell you, don't move, it's perfect like this. So you become a little bit like a statue. And if you are vain and all that, you will take pose, you know, you will try to show how you at your best. Or you say, well, stop this, I have to put back a little bit of more. So you become very conscious of being, like he says, an object. You are in the process of being photographed, you feel the transition between one state to the other. You were a subject, unconscious, happy, all this, connecting with the world, and suddenly you become somebody like a statue, if you want. He says more than that. He says it's a micro experience of death, as if you were dead. And he remarks also that the photographer doesn't want that. He wants you alive. He wants you to look at your best. So he says, the photographer knows this very well, and himself fear, if only for commercial reasons, this death, in which his gesture will unbound me. Nothing will be funnier if one were not its passive victim, its plastron, as Sade will say. Then the photographer contortions to produce effects that are lifelike. Wretched notion, he says. They make me pose in front of my painter brush. They take me outdoors. It's more alive than indoors. Put me in front of a staircase because a group of children is playing behind me. They notice a bench, and immediately, what a windfall, make me sit down on it, as if the terrified photographer must exert himself to utmost to keep the photograph from becoming deaf. So from the point of view of photographer, it's exactly the same problem. Recently, I was photographed, and it's exactly that. No, don't look at me, he says. Don't pose. Speak with your friends. Meaning he tried to get something alive. And sometimes it's almost ridiculous because, okay, hold this book and look like, say they will give you so at the end you don't know where to look, and you look like an idiot, of course. And this is this process of transforming yourself into an object. And then Barthes concludes of all this process, he says, but I already an object, I do not struggle. I foresee that I shall have to wake up from this bad dream, even more uncomfortably. For what society makes of my photograph, what it reads there, I do not know. In any case, there are so many readings of the same face. But when I discover myself in the product of this operation, what I see is that what I have become, total image, which is to say, deaf in person. And this is one of the famous photos of Barthes that he have used with this kind of half smile. And he commented about this. He said, I try to look intelligent and a little bit subtle, so I have this half smile. But all this seems to be played. It's not really... I thought of illustrating that. Okay, I did it already by this quotation, but by some caricature of Daumier. Daumier is interesting because he saw the beginning of photography. He saw the daguerreotype and things like that. This is a daguerreotype done by Nadar of him, of Honoré Daumier. And again, Daumier was probably suddenly a bird passes something, so he turned his head and look, and he was stuck like this. He looks like thinking of... So he made a series of caricature, I just show you a few, in which exactly what Barthes described is well expressed. For instance, the photographer and the photography, you have the impression that the photographer is telling him, don't move anymore, you are perfect like that, you look like a statue, don't move, I will take you like you are. And the guy seems to be very conscious of himself. He looks like a little bit the bourgeois of Ingres. You have seen this guy with the two hands on his knees like this, and very powerful expression. And the photographer is like, wow, crazy, well, it's perfect, don't move anymore. Another one that I like, oh yeah, I just want to say, most of the situation there is the portrait. But when the photography was invented, the first usage that, for instance, Arago was proposing for photography, it was during the Egypt campaign. He says it would have been fantastic if we had photograph. We could photograph a hieroglyph and have all records of this old writing and all that. But slowly, of course, what was evident, the best usage of photography was to make portrait. This is a kind of classic daguerreotype of Edgar Poe. Just as an example of this trend, let's say, suddenly become very important in photography, of photographing portrait and having people more or less conscious of what was happening. The other caricature of of Daumier, in which, then again, the guy is so self-conscious, but he is in charge of the gardening of a place. You see, he poses with a shovel and not with a gun or with anything. He has a shovel in his hand, and he will stay like this for posterity. You know, his picture will be finally in fact, what he's looking in the picture, what he wants to achieve is immortality. Yeah? So we are always dealing a little bit with death in a way or the other. This kind of petrification of the personage through the lens of the photographer. He becomes suddenly a statue. I tried to find an example of that, and Monsieur Webster, Daniel Webster, who was an American statesman at the time, is almost a perfect example. I thought first he was the Webster of the dictionary, but it's not the same guy. The dictionary was done by a man, Noah Webster, and not by this one, not by Monsieur Daniel Webster. But he have all. The one I like best is this one, in which why? Because one of the problems of the daguerreotype, it is the time exposure was very long, 20 minutes habitually, at least. So the people were moving or were yawning and all that, and then they have to do it again, and it was terrible. So they have really used this device like this to keep the head not to move. But of course, to make a nice, sweet scene like this, in which each one smile one to the other, what he called a gracieuse pose. Then for 20 minutes, it's very hard to be smiling for 20 minutes. Then at the end, you get a shout at your dear wife. Okay, so you see the kind of problem they had. When they try also to expand toward a landscape, it was the same type of problem. This is an early Daguerre view of Boulevard du Temple in Paris. But if you look carefully, there's nobody on the street, and except in one little corner, you have a guy who have his shoes being shined. I don't know, do you see it? On the left side, downstairs. He's the only person there who are, so he probably took that very early in the morning, and also from very high. We know that Daguerre and Nadar also were tempted to go in a balloon, in a montgolfière, you know, to above Paris and to take photo like this. And so you see all this, all these photos shows in fact a kind of, I would say, not only there's no problem to be turned into object, but most of people like this idea that they will be kept in memory as a kind of statue that he will have decided, how they decide. And that's why when you go back to the portrait of Raymond April, I was thinking maybe she have found a way to resist to this objectification. By closing her eyes, she kept the subjectivity. And even if she's photographed, she still show some subjectivity, as if this very idea of closing her eyes keep then suddenly like a private person with inner problem, with maybe she was submitted to violence, I don't know, but this is not our business, this is her. This is a kind of private life being affirmed as such. And then it will be one of the rare examples in which the photo doesn't transform you from a subject to an object, but keep you as a subject, okay? So this is my first part. But this is very nice. We saw thought expressed through outside. Is it possible to imagine a way to express what is inside our imagination and memory, especially? Did artists have tried to show it from inside? And I remember in a whole issue of Scientific American, I had this illustration you see with, it's not a work of art, it's just a way to display two problems. And the author wanted to explain the rules that Descartes have proposed to have a well-organized mind. So he opposed two types of mind, one on the left, which is probably the most common one, in which you have all this thing in a complete disorder, and the other who follow the rules of Descartes and have everything neat and put in different case and all that. The idea here of drawers and layers like this, a kind of a cabinet, if you want, is a very classical one, in fact. We don't think of it spontaneously. We think, okay, it makes sense. In our mind, you must have these little drawers in which we can go and get souvenirs of the past and then put them back and forget about them. This idea is, you have it in John Locke, for instance, in which he speaks of the, for instance, the senses at first let in particular ideas, and furnish the yet empty cabinet of the mind. This expression of cabinet of the mind. By degrees, growing familiar with some of them, they are lodged in the memory, lodged in, it's really like localization in which you put all these souvenirs and memory. And if you are well organized, well, you can fetch them back. Or if you are not, well, you go by association of ideas and you get lost in a kind of mess. The cabinet that he could be thinking of could have been also the cabinet of curiosity at the time, in which also there was this idea of representing something of the totality of the world that could be kept in the mind. And the classical example of this cabinet of curiosity is the one done by this Dr. Ole Worm, who is a Danish man of the 16th century, 17th century, who had in his house a little room like this that he filled with whatever you could imagine. You have skulls of animals. If you look on the ceilings, you have even a bear suspended there. You have a kayak of Inuit people. You have a costume of Inuit, and little boxes with insects and with stones and whatever. And this kind of accumulation represent what Michel Foucault have well described in the Les mots et les choses, when he speaks of this idea that in 17th century we try to have a kind of tableau of all nature, in which everything will be at its place and organized in a kind of hierarchical fashion. And this is, of course, okay, you can see it's a description of the world, but it's also something in the mind, something that you have in the mind that it's your mind who can organize the world in shells like this. But there is something very foreign to us, let's say a little bit even crazy here, and I didn't realize it before looking at the essay of reconstruction of the cabinet of Dr. Worm, done by a modern artist who is Mrs. Rosamund Purcell, done recently in 2003. I think, I don't remember which university she exhibited. I think it's something in Philadelphia. I'm not sure. Anyway. But then the crazy aspect of it is even more evident because the connection between all these things is not at all clear. Say, why, for God's sake, to have the skin of an alligator near a polar bear and then to have the skulls of animals looking at it and all these little boxes? It becomes like as if the need to collect and to accumulate things take over, let's see, even this fascination with order and organization. Okay, this I showed you now to prepare you for the more difficult part of my lecture. I want now to connect this that we saw with a recent work. I hesitate to say work of art, you will see why, that I saw at the National Gallery very recently, that may come here for all I know. And I didn't know at all about these people and who they were. I thought it was, anyway. You enter in a museum, and suddenly you are confronted to a corridor like this. Some of them burn, like you see in the foreground. And then in the background, you have shelves with indescribable type of things, including a moose on the top. And it's signed by BGL. I said, I didn't know who he was. I thought it was a... And then I was told, no, it's three guys, okay? From Quebec City, Jasmin Bilodeau, for B, Sébastien Giguère, for G, and Nicolas Laverdière, for L. They were students in art at Laval University, and they came after I think they finished their studies at Laval, and they met in Quebec at the time, and suddenly they make this exhibition. It's called The Discourse of the Elements. Very weird. It's funny in photo, but when you are there, it's very weird, because you are in a museum, and you have suddenly the feeling that you are not in the right room, you know, that you are suddenly maybe in a warehouse or somewhere where they put junks that they don't want you to see. Then, little by little, by reading about them and all that, I realized that what we see there on the left in this accumulation of things are in fact objects that they have already used in previous performance. These guys were artists of today, okay, they make performance. For instance, in this one, it's called Walk With Me, they used these trousers that you see on the left with little wheels in the street of Quebec. I could imagine the effect that they had there. See? Quebec is a very nice city, but they are not used to have guys with the little pantalons comme ça qui s'en vont avec des roulettes. Qu'est-ce qui leur arrive? Ils sont tournés fous, I'm sure. But bravely, they went through the street of Quebec with this, and then they put it in the Discours des éléments. It's a thing of the past. Then you realize that all the elements there were elements already used by them in different type of installation or works of art. Let's say, for instance, this this kind of a little bit like in the theater. Well, one of these guys hide behind them with binoculars and look at the people and disturb them, of course, by doing that. You see them then in the Discours des éléments. The little motorcycle that you see there, here are the three guys. You three them all dressed in yellow, and they call it fast and dangerous, but pushing it like this, not very fast and nor dangerous, but anyway. And so, again, you see them in there. And from photo to photo, you will see that the elements change places. For instance, the green things are now in the top before they were in the bottom, because this work was shown in different contexts. They were shown in Quebec, and they were shown also in Ottawa. So when they remount it, when they redo it, they may change the order of the things. And, okay, here it's a kind of box with a transparent window, in which inside there's a dog, but a stuffed animal, who is inside. So they put it in the park like this, and they call it ability to escape. Yeah. Well, the poor dog is dead, and it will not escape much. But then again, it was kind of disturbing type of things to put there, and they put it also in the Discours des éléments. This is the same dog was used glued on the door like this, and they call it to walk the dog. You go with a car with this in the street of Quebec, you may have some call to the police. What happened? Okay. And then this fantastic moose, it's a real thing. It's as big as a moose. He just lacked one of his, how do you say? Antler. Well, and antler. And so I don't know. So maybe some young people will recognize him. I was told that it was used in Pierre Lapointe presentation, one of his record, in which on the cover he used this animal. I don't know, but I'm not fan of Lapointe, so I have no idea if it's true or not. But maybe some of you will know and could tell me after. Anyway, so with time, all this accumulation of things become to be, okay, I kind of understand now what they mean a little bit by discours des éléments, by discourse of the element. The elements are part of previous shows that they have done. And they have a discourse, if you were involved in it, each time that you see one of those things, if you are the artist who have done that, you remember suddenly how fun it was or how bizarre it was, the situation and all that. So it's kind of discourse that it tells you by a series of association of ideas that you have suddenly in you. But nevertheless, the presentation seems so crammed, so disordered, that if it's, you remember my picture of the two head, one well organized and the other all messy, well, this will be the messy one. But I thought, okay, that's it. I begin to understand a little bit what it's all about. And I thought it was finished, but then you lean on a wall somewhere because you don't know where to go, and suddenly there's a door that opened to a completely different spectacle, done by them also. And you enter suddenly in a big room like this, in which you see this thing who goes up and down, and there's a kind of ball, I don't know if you see it on the right, that rolls one side, and there's cushion on each side, so poof, it goes like that, and then in the other direction. And the ball itself is covered with little mirror, and it creates all these little spots of light. So after the mess that we just saw, you suddenly have an image of very rational, very well organized. It's almost like Galileo experience on the slope of the La Chute des Corps. Look at another picture, close-up of this big ball with this little mirror and these little... So it's very surprising when you see that after what you went through, you have suddenly, okay, maybe before we had the imagination, the memory with all this complexity and all that, but now we have reason suddenly. So many aspects of the mind were described that way. I'm sure I've not convinced you of the importance of that work. But I want to finish one parallel in which you will see it asks a good question about our own perception of what is art. I think what is the problem here when you see the thing that we just saw, the problem it is that we think it's easy to do. It has nothing, what is the hard there? Okay, I understand they have a concept. Let's say I agree that with them that it's a way to represent memory or to represent memory of the past, things that we have lived before, but maybe at least make a video of it or make a painting of this. Why to just throw at us all these objects? I think this is the main problem that we have with type of work like this. And then I thought, okay, I will make a parallel in which exactly I think there's the same idea is expressed, but in a kind of very perfect way, if you want, in which art seems to be at the foreground. And it is what we call the studiolo. A studiolo is a kind of cabinet done for these two people here. And you have, again, the woman I was showing you with half-closed eyes. This is the Baptista Sforza that you see on the left, and with the Duke of Federico de Montefeltro, who is the owner of this cabinet that I want to show you. So he is in Urbino, but also one in Gubbio. The one in Urbino is big, and it's a big castle. It's above the city, and they could not move that. But the one on Gubbio was sold with a lot of protests by some Italian art historian or others, was sold to the Metropolitan Museum in New York. And there they reconstructed. And what you see there, it's a kind of an incredible inlaid work of little piece of wood, creating the impression of you are like in a study. That's why they call it studiolo. And it's perfectly done in terms of trompe-l'œil, if you want. You have really the impression that you are in 3 dimensions, but if you look carefully, the legs of the little table on the right are just trompe-l'œil. They are not real. They are part of the wall, if you want. So there, I would say, the art triumph, but when the connection with the BGL things, it is the disorder that you see in the armor, in the little shells that you see that. The problem then, the object that put there are so bizarre, and the association between them is so unclear that you could say we have, again, an image of this mind without too much order, in which everything of the past could accumulate it and just work by association of ideas like this. Okay, here, for instance, you have a compass, you have maybe a musical instrument that I don't know, maybe a square in the back with the plumb line, and an hourglass. Trying to make sense of the reunion of this object is not clear. And on the right, I show you where it is in the display. Another example, you have here, okay, a kind of drum and a flute. Okay, this could have something to do with military aspect. The Duke of Montefeltro was a condottiere, so he was a man involved in war, and he was a military man. And okay, so maybe that's an allusion to his military career. But see, a drum and a flute, he's not a big fighter, if you think of it. He's not with a gun and thing. And then you have this box, always perfectly done with this inlaid wood, but again, what he's doing there. So I go a little bit faster. This wall is fantastic because it's the triumph of disorder, of association with any direction, if you want. And again, this is the table who looks at the foreground is not real. In fact, the whole studiolo is not real. It's not a place where he could read. It's just to show to his visitors and to impress them, because the real library is somewhere else in the castle. And so he brings them there, have a little espresso, or I don't know what they drink then, but let's say amaretto, or I try to find some Italian drink, but and they go after, they discuss whatever they have to discuss, and they are very impressed, of course, by the surrounding. Look, again, this same type of accumulation of things. Even the books, you don't see the title, so you don't know in what he's interested in. And you have the instrument of music, two of them, and between them a candlestick. Why? See? What is doing there? Mind you, there is tons of studies about that in which they try to find a meaning for each object like this. But what was interesting to me was not this aspect, but it was the disorganization, the kind of, here you have a concept, in fact, which is rather close to the one that I was showing you before, see, this kind of mental mess in which we are all the time, but in two very different fashion that make us ask the question, what do we think, why we think this is art without problem, and the other we have difficulty with it. It is, I think, spontaneously because we don't see art without craft. We see them together. We don't see art as a completely conceptual type of thing. It has to be translated by something done by the hand and by some cleverness or things like that. But if you are fascinated by concept rather by this, because ask yourself, if there was no concept here, if it was just pure, I would say, how do you say, kind of performance, you see, of these guys who make inlaid, it would become boring fast. You know, it's well done and all this, but it represents nothing. It has no subject matter. If it was just a kind of marqueterie as such. So that you see, we have to have both, in fact. We have to have maybe a kind of concept, but also eventually a way to put it in visually. Here, this Montefeltro was honored by Lord de la Jarretière, the garter hoarder of the English. And that's why he has this anneau, this kind of circle there, where it's written, "On y soit qui mal y pense." And I show you on the right the real thing. "On y soit qui mal y pense" means the hell if you think badly about this garter, because, of course, it was a little bit high on the thigh. But so he put that with an open book that we cannot read, of course, because it's in wood, and on like this. And if you go back to this thing, I think there's a kind of connection in the concept, in the concept. And more than that, I was reading recently about how Freud described the discovery of psychoanalysis. And he said at first we were using hypnosis. And we got from hypnosis, of course, some of the content of the mind of our patient. They were telling us story that we would not have get otherwise. And he says, I abandoned this technique, and instead, I asked the patient to make free association, and I give him only one rule, not to restrain in any type of association that could come, not to judge that this is not important, I should not say it to the doctor, really to be honest and to say everything. Maybe I should read just a little bit. He says, it was essential, however, that he should bind himself to report literally everything that occurred to his self-perception and not give way to critical objection, which sought to put certain association on one side on the ground that they were not sufficiently important or that they were irrelevant or that they were altogether meaningless. And in a way, it's a little bit what they do here. They remove nothing. Everything is there. As if they were revealing the unconscious completely, what is actually repressed, and we don't want to show, suddenly we have it. And that's why the work, I think, is so disturbing. When you go through it, you are not sure. You have, say, rational objection, like the one I said before. Okay, this is not really hard. It's just a concept and all that. But then the very fact that it's the accumulation of that, I was thinking, this is a little bit the repressed, that Freud speak about, that is coming out suddenly, and without choice, without accumulation of anything. Look what he says after. He says, it may seem surprising that this method of free association carried out subject to the observation of fundamental rule of psychoanalysis should have achieved what was expected of it, namely the bringing into consciousness of the repressed material which was held back by the resistance. We must, however, bear in mind that free association is not really free. The patient remains under the influence of the analytic situation, meaning he's in the room of the psychoanalyst, he's on a couch and all this. There's a situation that could bring some memory. But here the equivalent of that, of course, is the museum. They are in a very special place. They have in a kind of empty cube in which everything is possible. And in which also the very idea of display is important. In a museum, you don't hide things, you are there to show them. And so this also is like a context in which he encouraged this type of things that they were doing. And Freud concluded, it will so arrange it that the repressed material itself will never occur to the patient, but only something which approximates to it in an allusive way. And the greater the resistance, the more remote will be the substitutive association, which the patient will report from the actual ideas that the analyst is in search for. So he says, okay, what finally we see, it's kind of the repressed, but a little bit arranged, a little bit transformed and all that. And indeed, you may have two types of representation of unconscious. This winter, I was in Israel, and I went to a museum. It's called Elena Rubinstein Museum in Tel Aviv. And I saw them, an artist that I had no idea, who did with the same idea, but exactly the opposite. I will show you. She's called Michal Hyman. She's relatively young, but let's say in her 40s. And she have made this type of display, which is called archive, in which you have this envelope suspended like this. And then it's like, if it's your personal archives, you don't know what is in the envelope. Everything is closed. Freud would say maybe repressed. But it is the same idea of accumulation of memory, but now instead of representing it like boys, a guy will do it. Here's a woman, more discreet, and I thought it's even more efficient that way. That's what we saw before. Because it's so neat, it's so clear, and there's a mirror in the back that reflects it as if it can go like this infinitely, as if you can, but she's not a Canadian artist anyway, but I thought it would be a nice conclusion to my presentation of the inner world. Okay, so that's it. And next time, will deal with landscape itself. It's about time, but I avoid the subject up to now, and as the exterior. And I will take advantage that you have the big exhibition coming, the Expanding Horizon, to take some example of that and to prepare a little bit the exhibition. Okay, so thank you.